Assalamu alaikum students. My name is Ms. Aisha Sadiqa Jamal and welcome to your last recorded session for the play Julius Caesar. In today's session, we will be exploring the idea of tragedy and a tragic hero. We will analyze critically the tragedy of Brutus and Caesar, and we will reflect on the themes of honor, ambition, and loyalty. Let's look at the definition of the word tragedy. And we look at it from the point of view of one of the greatest Greek philosophers, and that was Aristotle. Aristotle defined tragedy as the downfall of a noble hero or heroine, usually through some combination of hubris, fate, and the will of the gods. Hubris means excessive pride towards or defiance of the gods. It's basically a flaw in the character of a person. So tragedy for Aristotle was, it defined a flaw in the character that eventually led to the downfall of that character. So tragedy and tragic flaw, as we'll look at in the next slide, we'll discuss in the next slide, tragedy and tragic flaw are quite interrelated, especially when we look at it in the context of this particular play, Julius Caesar. Tragedy is considered to be very closely related to the downfall of a particular character. So, tragic hero. Who is a tragic hero? Now, if you look at it, there are two very important words here that we need to consider separately. Tragic, tragedy, as we just discussed. So, and hero. So, who is a hero? Again, we look at it in terms of the context because this is a play, it is set in the Greek era. So, the term hero is derived from a Greek word that means a person who faces adversity. Adversity means any sort of problems, or demonstrates courage in the face of danger. Whenever we think of the word hero, whenever this word comes to us, we always consider it to be a person who has outstanding capabilities. And this can be physically, it can be mentally, it can, in any way, a hero is someone who is extraordinary in a lot of ways. So what then makes that hero who has such amazing, who possesses such amazing characteristics, what makes him or her tragic? When a hero confronts downfall, he is recognized as a tragic hero or protagonist. So when that particular person who has such amazing qualities is confronted with failure, in some other terms you can say downfall or failure, then that person becomes a tragic hero. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, characterizes these plays or stories in which the main character is a tragic hero as tragedies. So, tragic hero is a person, is a character, and that character's story, that character's events and descriptions, they became tragedies. They became known as tragedies when we consider it in terms of how Aristotle describes it. So, in tragedies, in plays, or in stories that are regarded as tragedies, the hero confronts his downfall. Why and how does he confront his downfall? It is either due to fate. Number one, it can be that it was simply written in his fate. It was bound to happen. Or by his own mistake, something that he did himself or herself. Or it can be for any other social reason. So there might be one reason, there might be a multitude of reasons that all conform together, that all combine together to actually lead to the tragedy of that particular person, that lead to the downfall of that particular person. So who is the tragic hero here? Is it Caesar or is it Brutus? The tragic hero, we're going to look at both Julius Caesar and Marcus Brutus in separate terms. Is Julius Caesar the tragic hero? Now let's look at the points. How? Because this play is titled as Julius Caesar, and in many ways, when we look at different interpretations, it can be called as the tragedy of Julius Caesar. So when we look at it, when we consider it through the lens of the fact that the title of the play is Julius Caesar, so the ultimate or the obvious conclusion is that Julius Caesar was the tragic hero. So how? How does what happened in the play that made Caesar the tragic hero? He was a nobleman of high rank. We said that a tragic hero has some heroic qualities. So, what were the heroic qualities that Caesar had? He possessed he belonged to the noble class. He had a high rank. He was a historical figure with a tragic flaw which led to his downfall. He was a respected general. He had won many wars. Everybody loved and appreciated him. These characteristics made him the hero. So, what made his life tragic? It was his death. Caesar accepted his fate of death and achieved honor and respect in his death. So, we can say that what made Caesar's life a tragedy was simply the way he died. The manner of his death, which was that he was killed by other people, that when we look at his entire life, the manner of his death, we can call his life a tragedy. We also discussed that the tragic hero always has a tragic flaw, has a character flaw. So, what was Caesar's flaw? It was arrogance. If you look at this evidence, but I am constant as the northern star, there is no fellow in the firmament. Caesar says very clearly here, he is boasting about his own qualities and he is saying that I am the best. There is no one like me. So his arrogance can be called a tragic flaw. Is it Marcus Brutus? Now let's look at his characteristics. Um, in William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the character of Brutus has historically been considered the tragic hero, although this play is not titled Marcus Brutus, it is titled Caesar. But if you look at it, if you consider it very, very carefully, in the majority of the play, it is Brutus and his characteristics and his idealism that we are considering and that are leading to different events. So, Brutus, he was in a very powerful position. He was considered to be very honorable. But what caused him to become a tragic hero? It was the terrible decision to murder Caesar, which ultimately and through a series of intertwining events leads to his own demise. He displays many traits of a tragic hero, such as the character flaws. And which were those character flaws? What was the hamartia? Hamartia is a fatal flaw, tragic flaw. It's just a term that has been coined to to label character flaw. So he was a man of power and good morals, and he has both internal and external struggles. And his all of Brutus's struggles stem from the fact that he was loyal and he was considered to be very, very logical in every sense. Now let's look at some of the themes that have been very predominant: honor, ambition, and loyalty. And all three of these are very interrelated with the tragedies or with the tragic flaws that we just considered Brutus and Caesar of having. Nobility and honor. When you look at both these words, the first character that pops to your mind is Brutus. Why? Because throughout the play, it is Brutus who is considering his nobility and who is considering his honor and who is considering logic. And he's considering all of these things because he says he proclaims to be a very logical and very noble person, and whatever he does is very much influenced by his honor. So the word noble is frequently applied to Brutus by all of those around him. We hear from Cassius that Caesar's love for Brutus is important to the success of the murder plot. Caesar's love for Brutus was important. Why? Because Caesar could never have suspected that Brutus would kill him. Brutus himself was not very convinced unless and until it came to the question of Rome and if Rome would succeed. And that was where, again, it was his honor, it was his logic, it was his stoic qualities. So it is ironic that the presence of these very qualities, his trustworthiness in Brutus, contributes to the failure of the conspiracy. Why? Because he underestimated Mark Antony. Ambition. And on the one hand, when we look at honor and nobility, we think of Brutus. On the other hand, when we think of ambition, we think of Julius Caesar. Because in the first half of the play, throughout, we see that Caesar, we see very important lines that refer to the fact that Caesar was very ambitious. So, he says himself, he doesn't proclaim himself to be ambitious, but it's shown in his actions. He's made his way to the top of the Roman political system because of his exceptional achievements on the battlefield. His matchless skill as a general has allowed him to become a dictator, effectively bringing an end to several centuries of republican rule. So, how was he able to achieve so much? If Caesar was not ambitious, he would have just won one war and be okay with it. And he would just go back to his life and says, I have achieved, I have won a war, that's it. No. Caesar was ambitious. He wanted more for himself and for his life. And he wanted to see himself be the best. And that is why we say here that his all consuming ambition leads directly to his assassination, because he had become so overly ambitious and he wanted to be the best. He wanted to be the only one who everyone respected. That actually might have caused jealousy amongst the people. So that Caesar's ambition directly led to his assassination. Brutus makes this speech to the Roman public, and the audience soon after, he and his fellow conspirators kill Caesar. So here again, we see that Brutus, this is the rationale actually that Brutus gives the people, that they killed Caesar because of his ambition. And in the end, it's loyalty. Loyalty is an important concept in Julius Caesar. Brutus agonizes, Brutus worries, Brutus considers over and over about whether to kill Caesar or not. So why does he contemplate so much? Because he was loyal to Caesar. In the beginning, we see that it was very difficult for Brutus to actually accept the fact that he had to kill Caesar. But at the end, it was his logic that convinced him that Caesar was ambitious and it would be bad for Rome. And we also see in the last line that Caesar says to Brutus, et tu, Brute, means Caesar just simply could not believe that you too, Brutus? Is it that you too believe me to be so ambitious and so bad that you're killing me? It was unbelievable for Julius Caesar that his best friend, Brutus, considered him to be a threat to Rome as a republic. And the last thing is fate or free will. We consider fate, and especially if you look at it in the context of these last few scenes that we discussed, we talked about omens and we talked about predictions, and there were a lot of instances where there were ghosts that people saw. So that had a lot to do with what people believed their fate would become. And many instances we saw that, especially with Cassius and especially with Brutus in the last scenes, when they saw Caesar's ghost and Cassius with the omens about the birds, they had, just because of these few instances, they thought their fate was sealed. And when a person thinks that their fate is sealed just because of certain omens, it takes out free will from the equation. They did not believe that they could do anything about it. They understood that their fate was sealed, that their fate was written, and they had no hand in changing it whatsoever. So in Julius Caesar, two forces compete for dominance: fate and free will. Fate was portrayed as prophecies and omens. Free will was the character's ability to overcome it, which they did not. In Cassius's case, he did not even try. And in Brutus's case, he tried to overcome his fate. He tried to do something about it. Even though he had seen Caesar's ghost, he tried to win the battle, but in the end, he also failed. So Julius Caesar and Brutus received their share of fate and free will as well. And how they chose to act upon them changed the action of events in this memorable play. Julius Caesar actually believed that he had everything in his hands, and that was a misconception in itself. And Brutus, again, he let his omens predict his future for him, Brutus and Cassius both. So that is how these two themes play a very important part in how this entire in how all of the events they actually conspired, and in the ending with how Brutus and Cassius ended up killing themselves. They believed their fate. They believed that they could not do anything to change their fate. So that is how. And when, again, I'll just reiterate that when a person firmly believes that their fate is sealed, they take free will completely out of the equation. So thank you, students. I hope everything was clear, and thank you so much for joining in.